Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 this week. Coming up next, why has only 1.7% of Montgomery County residents been vaccinated for COVID-19? Another COVID casualty, MCPS decides to keep schools closed until March 15th. And what was the motivation to impeach the outgoing president? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the Dean of Democratic Politics, Sam Statland, Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher, Secretary of the Montgomery County Federation of Republican Women, Laurie Halverson, and political strategist, Susan Heltemes. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. In January of 2020, most Americans had never heard of the novel coronavirus. And now not a day goes by without all of us thinking about COVID-19 and the disruptions this disease has caused in our lives. For some, it's been a tragic loss of life. For others, it's been a loss of their hopes and their dreams. And with the worldwide casualty rate at more than 1.7 million people, there's never been a pestilence that enacted such damage. But little more than a month ago, hope with the spirit emerged with the announcement of not one, but two new vaccines to help defeat this awful plague. Sam, there has been some criticism of Governor Laurie Hogan for the slow rollout of the vaccine, with only 1.7% having been vaccinated to date. Is this criticism fair?
Well, Casey, some of it's fair and some of it's not. If the president had invoked the Defense Production Act, obviously there would be more vaccine to distribute to more states, and Maryland would get a better share, which means Montgomery County would get a better share. We've given out this week 6,700 shots. That was our allocation. And we have the capability of giving out over 100,000 a week. So yes, in that way, the governor really is not culpable, except he could yell more, but he does a pretty good job of that. But the biggest thing is not releasing the rainy day funds. We need those rainy day funds to set up more inoculation centers and more funding to be able to get the shots out faster and wider throughout the entire state, and especially here in Montgomery County.
County Councilman Andrew Friedson put out an email yesterday, and he said that the county was prepared to do 17,000 to 24,000 immunizations a week. If you do the math, then if there's with 1 million people in Montgomery County, we have more than that actually, the minimum we'd be finished with these vaccines would be 42 weeks. That does not seem very good to me.
Well, today at the county press conference, it was announced that the county is hoping on Tuesday to get 10 to 15,000 vaccinations. That's all they get. And there isn't more. States like Virginia, which is larger in population than Montgomery County, does get more than we do. But they are getting them out, according to Mr. Elbridge, as fast as they can. And what is interesting that I just learned today, that Johnson & Johnson has a new vaccine that could be approved within 6 to 8 weeks. Only one dose and no severe refrigeration. So if that's proved to be effective, that could be the best thing we have waiting for us.
But further, only have one.
Hold on, Sam.
Set up.
I want to hear from Sam. I want to hear from Mark on this.
So I was just going to say that one of the issues here is not necessarily the inventory of vaccinations. Is we were seeing a problem where vaccines are available, but they're not being used. And this is really where states and localities need to be flexible in not just having this narrow criteria, because if the people who fit that narrow criteria don't show up, the vaccines go to waste. So there's a balancing that you don't want to be overly prescriptive in determining who gets it if it means that people don't actually get the vaccine.
Yeah, and to address your point, Mark, I think we ought to have a wait list for people who are able to respond within a half hour of being notified that someone didn't show up for their vaccination, in order that dosage doesn't go to waste. I'm not sure if that's being done or not.
Well, but I want to vaccination centers, Casey, at the end of the day, they have extra shots. They're asking all the volunteers there who need a shot to step forward and get a shot. So, that's one of the issues. But if we had more money, we could set up more sites and more.
If we had a vaccine, if we had a waiting list, if we had a waiting, an extra center doesn't do any good if you don't have the product.
And we don't have enough product right now.
Right, we don't.
We don't.
Ladies and gentlemen, up until a month ago, we didn't have a working vaccine. And the fact that we have 3 vaccines possibly within the space of a year is an absolute miracle. It hasn't been done in medical science before. So we can kvetch about should they have bought more dosages or not. The fact is they didn't know it was going to work.
Well, it's working in North Carolina. My parents are getting theirs. They already have their 81 and they've already had their, they're getting their shot on the 27th of January. They're not in a nursing home, so they're in the 1B category. So
folks in DC age 65 and up are getting shots this week.
Okay.
We're not.
New York has just lowered its age limit to 65 from 75 for the second tier of vaccinations.
Again, they may have more vaccines than we do. That's the whole issue.
Or they may have a better governor. Who knows? Anyway, Mark.
I did not say that.
The Montgomery County School Board has pushed back the return date for schools to March 15th, in part due to the increase in number of COVID-19 cases recently, but also in the hopes that the teachers will have been vaccinated by the time school opens. Is this a wise decision?
Well, one of the criticisms all along of MCPS's response to this has been they have had this either we're open or we're closed response, as opposed to what a lot of people advocated from the very beginning, which was to prioritize students, and again, with teachers who are prepared to go back, prioritizing students to go back. So younger students, students with learning challenges could have gone back earlier on. Obviously, not obviously, but older students, those that for whom the remote classic works a little better. Unfortunately, that's not the approach that MCPS has been taking. It's kind of either we're open or we're closed.
Well, here's a shocking statistic that when school resumed after the Christmas break on that first Monday, 25% of all students didn't log on. It means once again that our students are falling farther and farther behind. And I want to turn to Laurie about this because many private schools have reopened, Laurie, because of a concern by parents about social isolation and the fact that they need in-person learning. And this has actually caused a decrease in the number of students enrolled in MCPS schools. So what is the outcome of that going to be?
Well, about 5,000 people fewer are in school this year. That's a big change in how the budget is going to be determined. And currently the budget's based on enrollment. And the proposed budget is for $42 million decrease than last year, but that happens to be $39 million more than the maintenance of effort amount, which is the amount the state sets for our county. So, are we gonna, are elected officials gonna vote to go above the maintenance of effort when our budget is severely impacted by COVID? I don't know. The number of teachers that we need we probably need them to help to, the kids are gonna come back with a lot of needs that, mental health needs and catching everyone up academically. So it's going to be a huge challenge. We need the staff, but I don't know if we have the money.
And another issue is access to broadband. Folks in the upper county just don't have access to broadband, so the kids can't get on for education and for learning purposes. And I know the council's been working on that.
Thank you, Sam. Now, Susan, while we're discussing the school situation, the county council has been debating whether to eliminate police officers being stationed in the schools as resource officers. And this past October, all 25 Montgomery County Public School Systems principals told the school board that they support keeping the school resource officer program in place. So what is the effort in the community to kill this program? If the education
this has gone on back to the 1990s. There has been an effort afoot by some organizations and individuals that this is a terrible thing to do. And from what I'm hearing is it's not going to pass. The school resource officers are going to be there when they go back to school. They serve a useful purpose. And in today's time of unrest, I don't think it's a good idea to let them go away.
Well, why is there the effort to even eliminate the program when it seems that the educators so universally endorse it?
The effort to remove them has essentially been in minority communities. And the thought is that it's discriminatory, et cetera. Over the years, there hasn't been an incredibly valid reason to do it, and it's why it has not taken place. Although there is now, in the time of police reform, you know, an effort to change things about, but it isn't going to happen. It's going to stay where it is, and it serves a useful function.
School resource officers help to prevent crime. I personally have shadowed an officer for a whole morning and saw the value of this. You know, there were 2 incidences that occurred during that time, and I saw the great value and how well they work together with the principals. It's a vital program, and in the past, the Montgomery County Council PTAs have greatly supported this. Haven't heard much from them this year. I think because there are some parents who feel otherwise now because of this whole defund the police movement, but I hope that we can keep our SROs.
And they also work with the middle schools and the elementary schools that move on into the high schools. And so it's the whole system. They get to know the kids, the schools, et cetera, and it needs to stay in place.
Well, we need to go on to our next topic, which is talking about what our county council is doing. And even though the headlines have been dominated by national politics for most of this past year, the Montgomery County Council hasn't been in a COVID cave. They've been very active these days and have several initiatives that our audience should be aware of. One of which is the council is holding hearings on with something called the Housing Justice Act, which would prevent landlords from raising rents in certain circumstances, but would also prevent inquiries regarding criminal histories on rental housing applications. And specifically, a landlord would not be able to inquire into whether the applicant has been arrested for, among other things, indecent exposure, public urination, and disturbance of the peace. Now, admittedly, those are misdemeanors, but the fact is that might indicate that this is not a person that you want living in your housing community. So, Mark, what do you think of this bill?
Well, let's be clear who suffers as a result of landlords not being able to screen tenants. It's the other tenants, it's the neighbors, it's those who have to deal with the antisocial behavior of people who could have been, should have been, might have been identified at the outset as having a history, who end up getting let into a building. I think anybody who's lived in a multiple dwelling has kind of had an experience with, you know, less than hospitable neighbors. And again, if there's criminal history, if there's an opportunity to identify somebody who's potentially a problem based on past behavior, then landlords should be able to do that screening.
Again, though, if this happened 10 years ago, I mean, is a maturation process with people. I think it's kind of a slippery slope if you're talking about minor, you know, these misdemeanors. I think that there is a limit, perhaps time range, 3 years or less or something.
If they're engaged in decent exposure, don't you think that suggests that there's a more serious problem than just that minor event? I mean,
but let's say it happened when he was 15, you know, 12 years ago. I think that
there wouldn't be any record if it was 15, right?
I don't know.
That'd be
the bill also prohibits any information from a juvenile history level.
Right.
So we're not talking about juveniles. We're talking about adults. And if they have a history of indecent exposure, that shows whether or not they're on the sexual identification list that shows that there's a problem there.
Well, you're saying a history again on these. If there's one incident,
Yes.
you know.
That's part of your, when you pull up your criminal history record, if you have one incident that shows up there, it's called a history.
But
But
Susan,
they can't- they should-
landlords have discretion. In other words, you're saying that, oh, there's an incident 10 years ago, the landlord has discretion. If they have a property where there's perhaps a history of antisocial, they may take a harder line. If it's a building that doesn't have a problem, they may not. So there's nothing that requires the landlord to use this information. It just, they have it as a tool to protect individual proprietors.
Well, look,
And it could be a subtle form of discrimination.
I'm sorry, we're running out of time on this segment, and I'm not going to be able to ask Sam about the Silver Spring Business Development Improvement District. So we'll have to hold that over for some later date. When we come back from this short break, President Donald Trump is impeached for the second time in his term. What's going to happen next? Stay tuned. And welcome back. Time stands still for no man, particularly for Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States. 1 week ago, President Trump held a rally, again challenging the legitimacy of the past national election results, and he encouraged those in attendance to peacefully proceed to the Capitol to express their support for his cause. However, some in the crowd took the opportunity to enact violence and attack the Capitol Police and storm the Capitol building itself. Now, with 1 week left in his term, the House of Representatives has voted again for Mr. Trump's removal. Susan, with so little time left before the swearing in of a new president, isn't it better just to move on? And why is it necessary to have a vote for impeachment?
I think considering how serious the issue is, that a stance had to be made. And I kind of laughed when you said that he said peacefully go to the Capitol. I watched again his whole speech last night. There was nothing in there about peace. He said we need to be strong. We need to do this. I mean, when a group has a noose outside and they talk right on the video that you hear about killing people like Pence because he's a traitor to Trump. I mean, as more and more of these interviews are coming out with people who are arrested, they said they were doing what Donald Trump told them to do. And yesterday during the hearing, Congressman Newhouse, a Republican, one of 10 that voted for it, said we should have spoken up earlier about his behavior. And the leader of the Republicans, McCarthy, said also, Trump held responsibility. And Congresswoman Cheney said the same thing. This is unacceptable. And so I commend the Democrat. But it's interesting, Casey, Congressman Harris on the East Coast didn't even show up yesterday, nor did he vote by absentee, which he's allowed to do. Maybe he's afraid of Heather Mazur running against him next time.
Susan,
Probably not.
Are you saying, Susan, that President Trump did not say that they should peacefully and—
No, not that day he didn't. He did not. And he sat in the White House for several hours being begged by people around him to say something. According to reporting in a couple of newspapers, he was almost gleeful. He had music going on and he couldn't understand why the people around him were upset that this was going on.
Maybe
the man from the moment he
of the speech then on CNN, because he did say peacefully and patriotically.
No, he said that yesterday, not the day of the event.
Yes, he did.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask Sam a question, if I might.
Sure.
Sam,
Yes.
despite what we've just heard in the last 3 minutes, there is more and more information being learned about the violent offenders that had been planning the seizure of the Capitol long before the rally, and that there was a total failure of communication on the part of the FBI, the Capitol Police, and the Metropolitan Police to taking this threat seriously and responding to the crisis beforehand. So why was there a rush to judgment and impeach?
It's a rush to judgment for exactly what Susan said. Trump incited to riot. That's what he was convicted of. But the real
No, he
big,
hasn't been
excuse
convicted.
me,
Let's be clear,
the
Sam.
real big picture, the real big picture is that leadership within the Republican Party, the financiers of the Republican Party, media, television, business, no one wants Trump to return. And if it takes an impeachment to prevent him from holding public office again, I think that is more than justified.
Well, let's be clear. What you're proposing is an impeachment after he's left office, the legality and the consequences of which are really unprecedented. I'm not sure you're going to get the result that you think you did. I think what you're really doing is turning Trump into a martyr on behalf of the people who supported him so strongly.
And
So
that's
be careful.
exactly what Donald Trump wants Americans to believe, Mark. That's what he's saying. And you keep communicating.
No, but I'm just, the consequences of the impeachment is simply showboating. There'll be no vote in the Senate because the Senate's not coming back until right before the inauguration. So this is
Trials have been held after they left office before, and it was perfectly legitimate. So don't say, Mitch McConnell said it would be a way to get rid of Trump. He has said that.
Law, because I don't think it is determined whether or not it was legitimate or not in the one instance in which it occurred. And we're going to have to wrap this up. You can see the passion that is still dividing our country, and that is probably the greatest negative that comes out of this event, is that there is no healing between our nation, and we are still a very divided country. Stay tuned for parting shots. There's been much discussion of late about the deplatforming of President Trump from social media, and many on the conservative side fear that the cancel culture will deprive them of their fundamental right to free speech. Those on the left will say, well, Twitter's a private company. It has the right to control its content. But the Supreme Court has addressed this issue of private property versus fundamental constitutional rights many times. In Public Aviation Corp versus NLRB, the court said ownership does not always mean absolute dominion. The more an owner for his advantage opens up his property for use by the public in general, the more do his rights become circumscribed by the statutory and constitutional right of those who use it. That view was underscored in Schneider versus State, where the court stated when we balance the constitutional rights of owners of property against those of the people who enjoy the freedom of press and religion, we remain mindful of the fact that the latter occupy a preferred position. As we have stated before, the right to exercise the liberties safeguarded by the First Amendment lies at the foundation of free governments by free men, and we must in all cases weigh the circumstances and appraise the reason in support of the regulation of those rights. The conflicts that we're seeing these past week is tearing our country apart. I hope we don't lose the spirit and our liberties that founded our nation. Now with parting shots, Susan Heltemes.
Trump hasn't talked about the disastrous COVID crisis, but there's something else he hasn't talked about. Executions are taking place for the first time in 17 years. As of this week, they executed their 11th person, the first woman since 1953 who had mental illness. 2 more are scheduled this week, but they have COVID. The Justice Department said, do it anyway. The judge says no.
Thank you, Susan. Laurie Halverson.
Free speech is on attack in America, and the best way to change these problems are at the local level. And I want to congratulate our new Montgomery County GOP chairperson, Sully Sullivan. So congratulations.
Thank you,
We have
Laurie.
a lot to do.
Mark Uncapher.
Hold on to your wallets. The Maryland legislature is about to come back into session. Be careful. This is the most dangerous 90 days of the year for Maryland.
Thank you. And Sam, your parting shot.
An appeal to the governor. Please, Governor, pay attention to our local delegations, our congressional delegations. Chairman of the County Council, Tom Hucker, and release the rainy day funds. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of the panel for being here on a day when the subjects are tough and it's difficult to address them. But again, one of the great things about this show, and I have to say I'm beginning my 21st year with 21 this week. that the freedom of speech that we all enjoy here and the freedom of debate is absolutely recognized. I want to thank you all. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.